Today's video is a real mishmash of techniques. I got faux embossing, partial stenciling, and a surprise 2-for-1 technique that I wasn't expecting, but it gave me a couple of really fun cards. I'm using some of the new products from the latest Alex Syberia release, but these ideas will work with whatever you have in your stash. Let's get started. I'm starting with my gel plate and a couple of green inks. I love to create my own colored cardstock with my ink pads, but you can use colored cardstock for this technique if you want. Gel plates are often associated with acrylic paints, but they can work well with ink pads too. I find I often need 2 or 3 layers to get the saturation I want. My panel was big enough to create a small card front panel and a whole bunch of holly leaves from the Jingle Bell Joy set. I'm going to glue them to the green panel to create the look of faux embossing. These leaves have tiny veining details on them that really enhance the embossed look. I placed them around the outside of the panel, and I didn't really worry too much about the larger empty space in the center because my Christmas bells are going to go there. To add some shine, I splattered gold watercolor over top by mixing the paint with lots of water, dipping my brush in, and then tapping it over the panel. I cut the bell tops and clappers from gold satin cardstock and the backers from black. This clever layered design gives you the look of a dimensional bell, and there are 2 sizes to give you lots of options. For a festive finishing touch, I cut 2 of the small pretty bows from red mirror cardstock, and I colored the backs of them with a marker just to make sure that there were no white edges visible. To assemble the card, I put the larger bell down directly on the holly panel, and then I popped up the second one. To make the bow really full, I used 2 of them together, offsetting the loops and tails over the bells. I chose a traditional season's greeting sentiment from the new Christmas sentiment set, and I stamped it with black on white cardstock, and I used the matching die cut to cut it out. This card has a very traditional feel with its classic red, green, and gold color scheme, and I think that works well with the holly, the bells, and the bows. Next, I tried a more whimsical Christmas color combination by varying the green and red by adding pink and aqua. This time, to do some repeat stamping, I die cut the Merry word from the panel first, as well as 2 more times. Then I was able to line up the stamp in the hole for perfect positioning, and then put a die cut in place and stamp it down. I did the red, then the green, and finally the aqua. I grabbed one of the other sentiments in the set, and I masked off everything but the word Christmas with some tape. Often I just cut my stamps, but this is another way to be able to just use part of a sentiment. This set has a number of strip sentiments like this, and there are various sizes of rectangle strip dies to cut them with. So I chose the smallest one to cut out my little Christmas word. For my background, I got out my favorite confetti layering stencil. Yes, again. By using just 2 layers, you get a really fun, kind of random looking background, and I added even more interest by using 2 colors on each layer, red and pink on the first one, and then the green and aqua on the second. By putting the stencils in the corner of the sticky mat and lining up the alignment hole in the top corner, the pattern is patchy and random, but without any overlap. Now I'm making a present, so I definitely want a bow on top, and I cut the larger pretty bow this time from white cardstock, and I added pink ink to it since I already have the red, green, and aqua on the Merry words. I glued the words to a square piece of cardstock, and to get them centered without any measuring, I put the bottom and top ones in place first, and then I was able to put the middle one right in the center. If you wanted a different look, you could make the square a different color, or you could stamp directly onto it. I popped up the present and the little Christmas word with some foam tape, and I used liquid glue to attach the bow to the top of the square. I think this twist on a traditional color scheme works well with the modern look of this card. This video is part of a video hop to celebrate the July release from Alex Syberia, and I've put the link to the next video in the description below, along with all the hop details. Next up is a clean and simple Christmas card with what I would call a minimal color scheme, just red and white. I started by using the new Sparkling Flakes cover plate, which cuts the panel and cuts the snowflakes into that, really just adding texture rather than cutting out any shapes. I added the new Fa La La die cut sentiment. You know I love to stack up my sentiments, but this time, to make it easier, I stacked up the shadow to give it some sturdiness, and I just added 1 layer of the actual word, which I had cut from red mirror cardstock. And remember the bows from my first card? Those loops cut some really good petal shapes as leftovers, so I used them to create a shiny red flower on this card. Finally, my surprise 2-for-1 design. I cut 3 of these snowflake dies, but I knew even before I started that I wanted to cut them down with circle dies to make some ornaments. That was planned. I played around until I had the right size of the circle dies, and I cut 2 smaller ones and 1 larger one. Well, look what that smaller one gave me. That leftover can work really well as a wreath. I'll come back to that. First, I blended some frosty colors onto the 3 ornaments. I used 2 shades of each color to try and create the look of some dimension, and I used Cummerbund and Fiesta Blue, then Serenade and Drive-In, and finally Aquatini and All That Jazz. This sticky mat works great for holding them in place while I'm ink blending, and while some of my inks are clearly staining it, it's holding up pretty well. Finally, I grabbed that wreath leftover and I blended some lime Ricky ink all over it. Then I came back in with some grass skirt ink just in the center. To finish the ornaments, I used the same circle dies to cut circles from holographic cardstock, and I put them behind the ink-blended die cuts. The iridescence peeking out through the holes is really fun and festive. Since this card is bold and it uses simple shapes, I chose a sentiment with a bold, heavy font, and I stamped it in the bottom corner. I added a black mat to finish the card. For my wreath card, I cut another panel with the Sparkling Flakes cover plate, and I trimmed it down to a square before pressing red ink onto it. I built the wreath with the 2 leftover pieces from the ornaments, along with the snowflake shadow die cut in white, to brighten it up. I used that same Peace and Joy sentiment, but this time I stamped it in red and die cut it with its matching die, and I popped that up in the center. I added some red berries from the Winter Foliage die set randomly around the wreath, so I'm back where I started with a classic red and green color combination. And just as an example, as I was playing around, I came up with this idea. You can always pop up the cutout portions over a full snowflake die cut for another fun look. Here's that final card, and because this time the cover plate panel is red on a white background, you can really see how much of those flakes get cut. You can just barely see the white showing through. Are you a Christmas in July person like me, or do you prefer to wait until later in the year to get started on your holiday crafting? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.